Good evening, everybody. My name is Fabio Parasecoli, and I'm the coordinator of the Food Studies program here at the New School. Very glad about this event, and it's clearly very well attended. There is a lot of interest when it comes to spirits, which is great. I let Andy introduce the guests, but let me say a few words about our program. The program as it is now started in 2008, and now it has developed in a pretty large set of classes that cover everything from history to contemporary controversies, and those are the classes that actually Andy teaches, to media, which are the classes I teach, to policy, politics, environment, nutrition. We're trying to provide a good choice of courses for our students, and all our courses are also open to continuing education students. So if any of you is interested in any specific topic, can join us for our classes. And we also organize various events during the year. It's a very important part of what we do. And I just wanted to briefly mention the upcoming events for the fall. On September 19th, we'll have an event about food labeling in our series, The Educated Eater, organized with Grow NYC, which manages the Union Square Market. I think it's a very interesting and important topic, September 19th. On October 11th, we'll have a panel on children and food, anything from nutrition to school food to all the debates and controversies that are developing around this topic, October 11th. And last but not least, on November 7th, we'll have an event about Henri Soulet, the guy who founded the pavilion, very important figure in American culinary history, and in fact is part of a series called Culinary Luminaries that has been developed in the past 3 years. That's on November 7th. So if you are interested in our events or in our classes, please leave your email address at the entrance, and we'll be more than happy to be in touch with you. Now I'd like to introduce Andy Smith, although he doesn't really need an introduction. We're very lucky to have him here at the New School. He's been teaching here for a long time. He teaches a lot of very successful, very well-enrolled classes. And his books are, I could be here for the next 15 minutes just to read the titles, but I just want to point out the last one, American Tuna, The Rise and Fall of an Improbable Food. And he also has a drinking history, 15 turning points in the making of American beverages. And he's also the editor of the second edition of the Oxford Encyclopedia on Food and Drink in America. And I'd like to welcome Andy, and please introduce our guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio. Fabio failed to give one important message, and that important message is today is my 27th celebration of my 39th birthday. So I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate my birthday today. It's a joy to see you all here. So we have three wonderful speakers. We have three wonderful speakers, and all of us have a California connection, which is surprising. I was born and raised in California and spent my early life there, and Richard Foss currently lives in Manhattan Beach. You may think that is part of New York, but I just want you to know it is a suburb of Los Angeles. It is a suburb, isn't it? Is it actually a district of?
We try to avoid being connected with Los Angeles in any way possible, but at least technically we're a suburb of Los Angeles. We are, however, very used to Google searches for local restaurants, bringing up places in New York that we've never heard of, so...
Richard will be our first speaker, and he is the author of Rum, A Global History. Our second speaker is Patricia Herlihy, who is a professor emeritus in history at Brown University. Do you know where Brown University is? It's someplace north of Manhattan, I think. Is that correct? But I just want you to know, were you born in California? Or I know you lived there.
I was born in, and I stayed there until I was 21 with the 5-year trip to China.
A 5-year time in China, in Harbin. No,
No,
wrong.
in Beijing mostly,
Beijing.
in Manchuria, in Shanghai.
And Shanghai. And our third speaker is Lesley Solmonson, who is currently not in California. She is in Magic Mountain, which is a northern.
Skype-land.
I'm sorry?
I'm in Skype land.
Skype Land, which is just north of California, just north of Los Angeles. So I just want you to know that we do have this LA connection. And Lesley is the author of Gin, A Global History. And I forgot, Patricia is the author of Vodka, A Global History. I have given marching orders to all three of our speakers, and I'm unfortunately a mean and nasty taskmaster so that we can get out of here on time. So they're all looking at me and with their mouths open. So we would like to begin with Richard Rum, A Global History.
If you ask the average American to come up with an image in their mind having to do with rum, they're usually able to pull up two of them. One of them is a guy with an eye patch and a peg leg. The other one is typically someone wearing a tropical shirt and holding a drink with a little umbrella in it. Because in modern America, we have the marketing of rum and an association with pirates, and we have, of course, the famous association with tropical drinks, and almost nothing else in modern America. And I will admit that at the time that I started this book, I did not have a whole lot more sophisticated sense. I knew there were a few more things to be known. If pressed, I could have certainly mentioned things along the line of the British Army and the British Navy having rum rations and grog rations. And I knew a little bit about the fact that rum had once been a much more important beverage in world history and in American history. At the time that I started writing this even, I did not know that at one point rum was the major export of the American colonies. I did not realize the degree to which rum had been not merely a beverage consumed all over the world, but an economic powerhouse, a store of value across the entire British Empire that led to the beginnings of some of the great fortunes in the history of England, America, and indeed all over the world. I had heard at least that in America, our American Revolution, though it may be more famous for a tax on tea, the initial thing that started the colonists being extremely annoyed with the British was a tax on molasses, which people in New England were using to make rum. It was only after I started researching the book that I discovered that even before our American Revolution, the first successful revolt in the history of the Americas had already happened, and it was over rum. When the Portuguese government told Brazilians that they could not make cachaça, the beverage that they had been making in Brazil for some years, the planters and the average people took over Rio de Janeiro and held it for 6 months, because they were using rum as the local currency, and this was shutting down their economy. So the very first revolution in the Americas was started by rum. The American Revolution was at least partially sparked by rum. And when I looked into it, the next revolution that the British Empire had to deal with also had to do with rum. That was the Australian Rum Rebellion. So around the world, people had once had a passionate attachment, not just to rum as a beverage, but rum was a major aspect of their economies to the point where people were willing to fight and die over it. And in the process of looking at this, in the process of looking at the variety of things that rum has been to people, I discovered a fascinating and very, very little known history. Among other things, we modern people, we've had so many years of learning about the evils of alcohol that it can be interesting to look back into colonial America and see when a small shot of rum was taken early on winter mornings as what the Puritans called an anti-fogmatic. It was believed that that foggy air would be much healthier if you just drank a shot of rum before going out of the house. I would not necessarily recommend this to all of you, depending on how much you like keeping your job, etc., but it is an interesting thing to look at. At the same time, rum was an indispensable part of a lot of the beverages that were part of the American colonies, not just the hot toddies that are still drunk, in eggnog, in beverages like rum shrub, which was a mixture of rum along with typically strawberries and some vinegar that was drunk on hot days, because they believed that drinking some alcohol was good to deal with the foul airs of the American colony. Now, you might wonder, why was New England producing that kind of volume of rum? Well, the reason is simple. Sugar was grown in huge amounts down in the Caribbean, but down in the Caribbean, you did not have a lot of places that had the forests to feed to the distilleries to make that rum. And in the American mainland, you had these places that not only had vast and endless forests, so there was no shortage of fuel. Working in a distillery in the Caribbean where it's already 100 degrees out and now you're talking about tending a fire in a closed room all day is a death sentence. I have found that, from my own experience in Massachusetts in February, having a place with a nice hot fire to work in, no problem. So as a result, Massachusetts was the great area for rum manufacture. And also here in New York, while it was still New Amsterdam, the Dutch were making rum. So rum is a part of our heritage in America to a degree that we don't often realize, but even more than that, because this is the global history that we're dealing with in this series. Rum extended all over the world because of the fact that partly, anywhere they made sugar, you have a waste product called molasses. And that product, which essentially was an industrial waste and started out being thrown away, well, if you run it through a still, you get rum. And people are ingenious about getting drunk and will continue to be, and therefore, once you know it can be done, it's really not hard. So around the world, in places like Fiji, in Australia, King Kamehameha of Hawaii really liked rum and demanded that it be made in his kingdom. And when he did, the Hawaiians had no tradition of distilling and no tradition of the metalworking with which they could do it. But the American whalers had come to Hawaii and they had left behind these whale pots that were used to boil down whale blubber. And the Hawaiians took these and managed to make rum in these whale pots. Now, I do not know how whale blubber affects the taste of rum, nor am I likely to find out, even if it is offered to me. No, I'd probably take just a sip. But people who, once you know it can be done, it will be done. So it comes to where it is done. Rum is made now in places where sugarcane has never grown and will never be grown unless global warming really is serious. There are rums that are native to Newfoundland, rums that are native to New Zealand. So all over the world, all around the world, there are people who have been making rum, and the rum has become part of their culture. Rum is an inextricable part of voodoo worship. There are certain of the loas, the spirits, who, notably Baron Samedi, one of the most powerful, Baron Samedi will not show up unless you pour rum on the altar. And it can't be cheap rum. Baron Samedi likes the Barbancourt tenure. So if anyone here is planning a voodoo ceremony, please keep this in mind. Not only in voodoo, there are others. The Quimbanda, which is a cult in Brazil, have the same kind of thing where the spirits may be called with rum. And there are also certain Christian denominations in Guatemala where, because of the fact that for so long there was very little cash in the economy, when you went to give an offering to the saints, instead of candles, which melt in the tropical heat, you poured a little rum on the altar in the Catholic churches, and this is still done. So, in various religions all over the world, in various cultures all over the world, you have rum. You have words that you use all the time that you may not know are related to rum. One of the examples that I found amusing, because I'd been using it all of my life, there's a word for what happened when the customs inspectors would come on ships looking to see if there were any barrels of rum hidden in the cargo. That word is rummage. Now, have you ever been to a rummage sale? Have you ever rummaged through your house? You know what you're doing? You looked like the customs inspector, just ripping through everything to try to find the hidden rum. So these are just a few of the things that I cover in the book. A very quick rise of rum from the very first time that the British, who were the first people, not the first people to make rum, but definitely the first people to commercialize it, that was first done in Barbados. It was first recorded in Barbados in 1651. Within 100 years, there was rum flowing all over the British Empire, and it was a major store of value. By the dawn of the 20th century, it was almost eclipsed as a beverage the world around. And the way that it came back with flair, with the fad for tropical drinks, is another story entirely. And I can't go into this whole thing because Andy is glaring at me even now to let me know that I'm about to go over time. But I'll let you know that, for one thing, the book is out there. For another, I had so much information and continue to find more that I have a website at rumhistory.com. So if you want to know more about rum, if you want to ask me questions about rum, if you want to hear some recordings of some of the worst temperance songs that mention rum, I'm accumulating a lot of those. Once you've heard my house band singing "Father's a Drunkard and Mother is Dead," you will know why you shouldn't have turned on the speakers of your computer. So, Andy, I believe I'm running over time, and that's why you're staring daggers at me.
Right on. You're very good. Thank you. Rum played a very important part in early American history, and vodka didn't arrive until the 1930s in America. Patricia.
Oh, thank you. Yes, well, I guess I'd like to present vodka to you as being somewhat mysterious, very simple, and definitely a globetrotter. When I say it's mysterious, I'm talking about no one's really sure who invented vodka or when precisely or where. And certainly the Poles and the Russians and Ukrainians have discussed this matter and gone to court over it. So we can just say vaguely, somewhere in Slavic land, probably in the 1400s, the process of distillation was taken or carried or borrowed borrowed by the Russians or Ukrainians or Proto-Ukrainians or Belarus. Somebody up there discovered the art of distillation, came up with vodka because of the grain, which was its principal part. So the discovery is shrouded in mystery, and the use of it is also not entirely clear. It's assumed that perhaps it was discovered by monks and used for medicinal purposes, and then somehow leaked out into the general population. And soon the czars took hold of it and used it as a powerful instrument for raising money and for retaining power and loyalty from their servitors. So that the mystery that still surrounds vodka, you can continue to explore. I've given up with regard to trying to establish definitely who invented it and precisely where and when. When I say it's a simple product, the United States defines it as an alcoholic beverage without color, odor, or taste. So what's there to say about this? It's nothing. Well, it turns out that it can be anything you want. And of course, the people who are marketing it understand that perfectly well. So they take this tasteless, odorless, and colorless product, and we can all dispute whether this is entirely accurate, and make it into whatever the public wants. They market it in their bottling and their labeling and their pitching and their celebration for certain niches. So since it isn't anything in particular, it can be something very particular if it is molded either by bottle or advertisement to suit your taste. There are vodkas for women. The Damskaya in Russia has a Marilyn Monroe skirt lifted up around a bottle. The United States has a little black dress vodka. It's made by women, for women. We have the Kalashnikov rifle in a glass Kalashnikov rifle form for the macho types. If you're a dog lover, there's Black Lab vodka, and so on and so forth. There's kosher vodka. There's vodka without gluten. There are environmental vodkas made in Wisconsin from organic wheat, and the mash is given to the pigs, and the labels are recyclable. And the bottles, as you've already noticed, can be extremely beautiful. Frank Gehry, who designed many famous buildings, has designed bottles for Polish vodka. And so it's really a kind of product that you can make into anything. And like rum, it was a negotiable instrument because it was so easy to transport. Since it takes no aging, it never spoils. It's, you know, you can do it in your kitchen. Every good Russian housewife had the recipes how to do it in her cookbook. So, and the simplicity, or the supposed simplicity and lack of character of this particular product lends it to becoming extremely versatile. You can dunk horseradish or vanilla or a wad of bacon in it, and you can really skip eating altogether. You can have glazed. Yes, this is not a recipe. My grandson's in the audience. I don't want to shock him. So at any rate, if you want a breakfast, a glazed donut vodka, you can have a little bit of bacon vodka with that, and maple syrup. For lunch, you can, that goes well with Richard. Well, at any rate, you get the point. There's so many flavored vodkas. Smoked salmon, if you want that with horseradish vodka, you can have that too. No point in getting in the kitchen at all. Just go into your liquor cabinet, and there you have it. And if you're feeling like you're missing a black lab dog, you reach for that. So, you know, what's not to like about vodka? There's even vodkas for hangovers. There's a Croatian vodka called Dr. Vodka that presumably the post-Chernobyl people took to ward off the radiation. So there are infinite possibilities for vodka, so it couldn't stay even in the North for very long. And as Andy mentioned, it did eventually cross over to the United States, first with emigres after the revolution in 1917, but it didn't catch on to the general population. The 1962 Dr. No movie, Shaken Not Stirred, introduced Smirnoff to put in a martini instead of gin, Lesley. And the promotion of vodka by President Nixon, a nice Quaker from California. He went to Russia, the Soviet Union, in 1972 for détente, and came with the head of Pepsi-Cola, and by the time they left, they had a deal going. We sold them Pepsi, our drink of choice, presumably, and in return, instead of rubles, we got Stolichnaya. So your favorite Stoli came by way of Pepsi-Cola, and it's still that deal going on. So in that way, the United States began to consume vodka, and even the Moscow Mule during the Cold War, and it has taken off, and it's the leading spirits in the United States. It's in Europe, it's produced by Europeans, it's going to the developing countries. The Indians are now making their own vodka, some called Romanov. I discovered that most of the developing countries use Russian names. In South Africa, there's a Count Pushkin vodka, and has a tie-in with an airline. And the airline has Count Pushkin written all over it. Unfortunately, the airline is called One Time Airline. Now, for a promotion, they would give you a liter of vodka to get on One Time Airline. And I think if I were getting on One Time Airline, I'd want a liter of vodka too. So the associations and the tie-ins can be somewhat bizarre. But again, the product is so malleable, you can make it what you want, you can tie it into whatever you want, so it's easy to make, and it is going, even to Brazil, they're making that drink with vodka sometimes instead of rum. I'm not saying we're pushing you out altogether, but we're creeping in there, the vodka sellers. In China as well, Baiju is finding a competitor in Diageo's Shanghai White Night vodka. Is produced in the oldest distillery in the world. They claim it's a $100 bottle. It's a beautiful bottle, so that you can dress it up, you can dress it down, you can soak your feet in it. You can put it on your tooth if it's aching. You just can't have a household without it. You can't travel without it. And I would like to claim for it. This innocuous nothing drink is rather spectacular.
Lesley, gin plays an
Hello.
important
I
role.
just want to read a brief passage. I want to make a little confession here really quickly about gin. On Sunday night, we took the child into the fields and stripped it and tied a linen handkerchief hard about its neck to keep it from crying. And then we laid it in a ditch. After that, we went together and sold the coat and stave for a shilling and the petticoat and stockings for a groat. We parted the money and joined in a quartern of gin. So this was a confession from a not very nice mother during the gin craze in England in the 18th century. And I wanted to read it to you because what it shows me is that gin has a really, really bad PR agent. We have words like gin joints, gin soaked, bathtub gin, all of those terms that you've heard and have given gin such a horrid name. I mean, what other spirit, and rum and vodka, God love them, but what other spirit has a craze named after it? Well, we have the gin craze, so it's pretty awesome. But the truth is that gin is a very misunderstood spirit. When you look at it, very much like rum, it is sort of a spyglass that you can see the entire world's history through, because even though gin started in a single place, it hopped and it hopped and it hopped across the globe. And along with it, history, of course, influenced, and vice versa, it influenced history. We can trace a proto-gin back to the 4th century AD. To the Arabs, in fact, who weren't trying to distill gin because, of course, they didn't drink alcohol. What they were trying to do was make medicine. And this sort of proto-gin, because you're starting with neutral spirit, grain neutral spirit, thank you, vodka, of course, grain neutral spirit, and then you're slowly flavoring it with botanicals. And the botanicals would cover up that scent and flavor and give you something of medical benefit. Juniper was known to cure everything from headaches to digestion problems. It actually was used to induce abortions way back when in Egyptian times. So it has a very, very long history, and it is at the core of what gin is all about. Part of the reason I say that is because when you go to the 13th century, we moved from the east to the west, and really the first true beginnings of gin start in Dutch Flanders, where they are making a juniper-based spirit with something called malt wine. And that is a very specific distillation of corn and barley and rye, and then flavored with juniper. And this was the magical elixir called Genever. It's actually like Geneva, but Genever is the way it's spelled, Genever. But Genever is now the Dutch and Belgian national beverage. And the average person, if you ask them about gin, they have no clue what Genever is. And Genever is the granddaddy. Genever is what came before anything else that we knew as gin. After Genever, that's when we'll start getting into things like London Dry, which you probably all heard about. But what happened is Genever was being poured out in little tots on the battlefields during the 30 Years' War. And the English soldiers who were over there, that 1618 to 1648, would have a little nip of what they called Dutch courage. And boy, that really got them going. And they went on the field cheering and ready to go. The war didn't go so well, but those soldiers brought back to England this taste for Dutch courage. And then during the time of William of Orange, when the Dutch-born William became King of England, he brought with him, of course, his taste for Genever. His court was all drinking Genever, and those poor, poor people like Judith Dufour wanted to do what, the Joneses were doing, except they couldn't make that wonderful Genever. All of the good distillers were up in Scotland. So what they ended up making was rot gut gin. And this is where gin really starts getting its horrible, horrible reputation. People were literally falling down drunk in the streets. Judith Dufour murdered her daughter. Women were selling themselves. It was pretty horrible. And some people have actually likened it to the crack epidemic of the 1980s in the US. Finally, there was something called the continuous still, that got a lot of the impurities out of this stuff that was having oil of turpentine and oil of vitriol and all of these nasty things in it. And this cleaner product gradually started being drunk and enjoyed without killing you. So that was kind of a big deal. The first gin really that we saw in America was Genever. London dry gin did not even rear its head really until the late 1800s, turn of the century. So Genever, which we anglicized to Geneva, was so popular that there was actually a gang on the East Coast that was stealing Genever, and they were called the Geneva Gang. Washington Irving used it in his story with Rip Van Winkle and blamed Rip's slumber on a little too much of something that was much like excellent Hollands. And Hollands gin was another term for Genever. So Genever was the key to the gin-based part of the golden age of cocktails with the gin cocktail. And then we moved on to things like the Martinez, which was the forerunner of the martini, that used something called Old Tom, which is a sweetened style, less impurities and more botanicals. And then, lo and behold, something named Prohibition came along. And we're back to bathtub gin, rot gut gin, sulfuric acid, oil of turpentine, people dying, not quite as badly as the gin craze, but not doing so good. And finally, when Prohibition's specter was raised, everybody got really, really sober, both physically and emotionally for a little bit, and then said, okay, we're going to drink, but we're going to drink London Dry because, you know, that's kind of serious. That's a very, very serious gin. It's not sweet. It's not like that fruity stuff that we had during Prohibition. And then London Dry took hold, and the martini and the gimlet and all those lovely classic drinks that we think of as gin drinks. As Patricia probably just said, of course, we then had the influx of vodka, that bad boy, who kicked gin's behind metaphorically and physically, and gin sort of petered out and became grandpa's drink until about 1998. And that was when Bombay Sapphire came on the scene and said, enough of this juniper, we'll have juniper, but there's more citrus. And suddenly non-gin drinkers were drinking gin. And the phrase that a friend of mine says, which is, gin tastes like Christmas trees smell. Well, yes, but Bombay Sapphire proved that wasn't necessary. In 2000, Hendrix came along out of Scotland and said, we're going to use chamomile and cucumber and rose petals. And sure, we'll still have juniper, but we're not about dry gin anymore. And those two gins were a renaissance in the world of gin and gave everybody carte blanche to do really whatever they wanted to. And while a dry gin still has to be about the now are all about artisan ingredients, and they're all about being local and showing people who you are and what your homeland is about. Scottish gin tastes like the Scottish Highlands. They are making gin in New Zealand out of wild ingredients down there. In South Africa, they're using indigenous ingredients. And so we've gone from full circle, pure juniper, to the rot gut stuff, to London Dry juniper again, to this thing that is almost like an Easter bonnet in a glass. And that's where we are today, where the sky is the limit. It's not all about how Christmas trees smell. And gin has become an essential ingredient in the bartender's arsenal and in the arsenal of anybody who likes to drink seriously on any level. And that's the story.
I want to open it up to questions, but I have a few to begin with. My first one is for each of you. You must have learned something that surprised you while you were writing your book. So, Richard, what surprised you in Rum: A Global History?
The thing is, I learned so much that surprised me that it's really very difficult to take it down to any one item. I think one of the things that just as a story that I found delightful was continuing a story that everybody knew, and to discover that the second half, the part you didn't know, was much more interesting than the part you did. What that was is, some people here have probably heard of the Peter Principle, the idea that if someone is incompetent, you keep on promoting them. Well, there was a spectacular example of this in Australia when Australia was the place where, of course, all the British convicts from the British Empire were sent. Nobody wanted it as a posting, so no one willingly went there. And at one point, the British government, faced with a great deal of unrest, sent someone who was an absolute genius of personnel management to become the new governor. That person's name was Captain Bligh. After the mutiny on the Bounty, which he provoked, they decided to send him to be the new governor of Australia. Almost immediately, before he even got there, he had an argument with another captain in the same fleet that was so severe that the two of them exchanged gunfire between ships. And when they got to Australia, not surprisingly, this was just before the Australian Rum Rebellion. So somehow knowing that this guy, who was the worst personnel manager possibly in human history, somehow was kept on being given other jobs, I just about fell off the chair when I saw that one and got to think, oh, yeah, thank you, God, for giving me this to put in the book, because this is so much fun to write. I discovered all kinds of things that were fun to write about rum in human history. So this book was a pile of surprises for me when I was writing it, and I hope it will be for other people who read it.
Patricia.
Oh, well, and as Andy told you, I'm a Russian historian. That is, I study Russia and Ukraine. And in researching this book, I followed out a theme I had explored earlier, but it became even more apparent how central vodka was to the economic history and political history of Russia itself, before the revolution and after the revolution and today. And I mean by that that since most of the time the state had a monopoly on vodka, it became as high as 1/3 of the total revenue. And in 1914, when Tsar Nicholas II took it in his wee little head to pronounce prohibition, it was disastrous. It was disastrous in the sense that 1/3 of the revenue, as I said, could not go toward the war effort. Since they didn't raise money through bonds or any other mechanism, it meant that many of the Russian soldiers went to the front without boots and rifles. And this also gave the war a very bad reputation and demoralized the troops farther on the war. So the timing of prohibition was absolutely out of sync with the necessity of the time. And because of this prohibition, the peasants knew that they had a great possibility to make moonshine. Moonshine was much more remunerative than trying to ship grain to St. Petersburg, way far away. And there weren't many trains available anyway, since they were carrying the troops to the front and bringing back the wounded. So the women of St. Petersburg went on strike in February 1917. The young cadets joined them, soon the soldiers. And then you had the February Revolution and the abdication of Nicholas II. So on the one hand, you had the anti-war feeling growing because of the lack of preparedness, and as I say, the disgust with the regime that could produce all of this moonshine and not feed the population of the great big city of St. Petersburg. So the revolutionary aspect that Richard also addresses is very important. And of course, in 1985, there was a kind of a reprise, but in a more minor tone, we might say, by Michael Gorbachev. He decided not for total prohibition, but he did what he could to cut down the hours and the consumption. And there weren't riots on the streets, but there were a great deal of consternation and dislike and unpopularity. So after 2 years, he had to stop his semi-prohibition of vodka and other drinks. He had all the vineyards torn up, which was a mistake, but California came to the rescue and has replenished it. And currently, of course, it's considered a national disaster because of the dwindling population. Young men are lucky if they live to 60 because of alcoholism. And the state, Putin, would very much like, I think, to resurrect a vodka monopoly so he could control the quality, the price, and the distribution of vodka, but so far he has not been successful. And as the petrodollars dwindle, the vodka revenue looks even better. So this is a kind of political, historical aspect that surprises me and interests me.
Lesley.
what was a lot of fun for me was really looking into the roots of gin being juniper and how it was used so far back medicinally. As I mentioned before, the Egyptians, the Arabs, every country on earth was using juniper as the ultimate panacea. And it was particularly of importance during the plague, where they would stuff it in pomanders that they'd use on their wrist. They would burn fires, hoping that the vapors would blow away all of the evil scents in the air. They didn't understand how the Black Death was being delivered. The doctors of the time, who were truly men who knew absolutely nothing of what they were doing, or those huge nose cones that you've seen the pictures of, they'd stuff juniper berries into those cones so that they were breathing those as well. And of course, because of their lack of reputation and these long nose cones, the term quack was coined. Later on, they were still trying to fool the public with using juniper berries as more of a medicinal aid. And around the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s, women were targeted with gins that were considered purely medicinal, like maple gin, which was known as the woman's friend, and it had juniper digestion and calm one down, and asparagus gin, which also had juniper in it, but also had asparagus, which was another known diuretic. So those medicinal qualities continued to carry through. And of course, Richard mentioned this as well, that the cocktail itself, which was a beverage of its own name, was originally used as a soporific. So juniper had a huge role in that, and of course juniper and gin are linked. So I just think of it as taking my medicine still when I have my drink in the evening.
For Richard and Lesley, I think this is your first book. Is that correct for both of you? Yes?
Yes.
And
Yes.
I know, Patricia, you've had academic books published before. My question to each of you is, what did you learn about the process of writing when you put your book together? Now we're talking about the book, not the content. Anything? Lesley, Richard?
Well,
this particular book, or writing the book in general?
This book.
For me, it really took me a while. I fought with that blank page concept because I'd always done storytelling really in smaller snippets. And I think what happened to me is gin finally started telling me a story. And when I let gin lead me through its story, the story told itself. And that was when I really, really started having fun because it was a constant learning process for me. And when I opened myself to that and to seeing, okay, gin, what are you going to throw at me next? That's what made it very exciting.
Richard?
as for me, I'd been writing for newspapers for over 25 years. So I'm very used to turning out a given amount of words on a given topic on a deadline. I have a great deal of discipline that has been built up over 25 years of doing this. But when it comes to the process of organizing something where there is so much freedom and where you have so much material, I have no problem with writing, but I am desperate about editing, because when I started out with something that was sprawling into about twice the size of what it should be. And when you have so many interesting stories and have to kind of bring it down, not merely for pedestrian things such as page count, but just to say, you are not trying to write an encyclopedia on this thing. You're trying to put this into a framework so that you can give the outline, and if someone is really interested in any one aspect of it, you can give them the material to go further. That requires a different kind of discipline than I ever dealt with as a journalist, because as a journalist, you're mainly trying to tell the whole story within something and being very self-contained about it. I had also had experience as someone who has taught some classes at UCLA Extension and has done lectures. I have the experience with putting together lecture plans, putting together lesson plans, as someone who had contributed to the Food Cultures Encyclopedia. I have this sense of, I love research. I can go, what are the things about this? The pestiferous thing about this book, I'm going to be researching rum the rest of my life. And I've already sold the book, but I'm hooked on it. It's an addiction. So it's the problem of winnowing down the ideas into the appropriate size, man, that's hard.
Patricia.
Well, there were two interesting aspects for me in writing this book, in two words, actually: footnotes and illustrations. Well, an academic, you put everything you know in those footnotes. I even put my best kind of jokes in the footnotes to liven them up. And I don't play the piano, but I had a feeling that I was something like a piano player who couldn't use the pedals. It really was frustrating at first. No footnote, where did I get this? Well, at any rate, that was one thing. That was, I finally, just said, put it down. And secondly, the luxury of searching for so many illustrations was glorious, because those mean academic presses, they just won't give you any money for illustrations. If they do, they're in black or white. So I had more fun writing to at least 48 vodka companies, wheedling them into giving me illustrations. I love the people in Mongolia. I won't tell you who my enemies were, who would not give me illustrations, but there were really some good guys in the search. I would have to go on the website and be blasted out of my seat with some music and listen to all of the jazz about it, and then find Contact Us and Eliminate Eudora, and then finally get them and say, please give me a picture. So it was kind of the bargaining your soul to get a picture to illustrate this book that fascinated me, and it was fun, and I really never want to write a book without a lot of pictures again.
Speaking about pictures, Richard, you ended up with a lot more pictures than you actually were able to put in the book, and so what did you do with them?
Well, as I mentioned, I put a lot of them on the Rum History website, and will continue doing so, because I love period images. I decorate my house with a lot of them. I have archives and archives of images that I've put together. One of the classes that I teach through UCLA is a thing called What Shakespeare Left Out. And for just a minor aspect of that, I started going into finding every picture that I could of how productions of Shakespeare had been costumed, going back to the earliest examples to show how people had costumed the different characters. And this is the kind of thing where that project has stopped a long time ago. I still have piles of these illustrations and images around that I want to do something with. Now I have the rum. If I want to do a mashup of Shakespearean characters drinking rum, I have material out the ears for this. But there is. It is interesting to look at the images in. Patricia, I haven't seen the gin book yet, but having looked at a few of the period vodka images in the vodka book, having looked at the images that I found in the rum book, there are all kinds of different ways that alcohol has been marketed as a healthy beverage, as something frivolous and carefree, as something for gentlemen to sit around looking serious, sipping together. And you can sort of lay all these out and see all the different ways of hitting these different markets. It is a great deal of fun to look at all of the ways that advertisers through history have tried to sell things through us. And once you start looking at things that way, well, for one thing, you don't stop. You look at contemporary advertising and kind of, okay, how are you trying to push this past me? It's a tremendous amount of fun, and I'm putting a lot of them up, and we'll continue to put them up on the website.
Okay. I want to open it up to questions. If not, I have 1,000 more questions to ask. So you'll be better off if you ask the questions at this point. In the back, please. We have to wait and get a mic.
This is a question for Professor Herlihy. I'm wondering if you know anything about sort of modern consumption of vodka, maybe among the young and the hip, especially in Moscow. Is vodka under threat at all, given changing trends and the emergence of money in urban centers in Russia?
In Russia, you're asking me?
Yes.
Well, in general, have you walked in a bar recently? You see all these bottles of vodka, every color, with lights behind them. In Russia, there is currently a controversy because of the extraordinary consumption of beer among the young. They tote 2-liter bottles of beer around as though it were mineral water, and indeed it's not considered an alcoholic beverage in Russia. So the argument centers around whether this is displacing vodka, that the youth are consuming so much beer, or, as others argue, it's a gateway to vodka, since they can become alcoholized through the consumption of beer. I find I go to Russia and I go to Odessa almost every summer, especially Odessa. And I found in the last few years my women friends have shifted from vodka to red wine. And of course, they're luckily placed there in an area near Moldova, in Georgia, and even in the Odessa region, you can produce decent wine. So there is a trend of wine displacing vodka among middle-aged young professionals. I think the older women, like myself probably, if I went into their homes, they'd still be offered vodka. The fact the cocktails is considered very Western and everything Western is chic, the consumption of vodka has not dwindled, to my knowledge. In fact, it's increasing.
Another question in the back? Okay.
Hi, it was a great talk. I have a question for Richard. You mentioned that they produce rum in places that can never and have never produced sugar. And my question is, how do they and why?
A couple of different things. For one, is since every sugar producer produces molasses, this is something that you end up with whether you want it or not, because as you are crystallizing cane sugar, molasses is what you have as a leftover. The world market for molasses is relatively small, so in many places molasses is actually an industrial pollutant. People have been throwing it in the rivers or using it to mix in with cattle feed. Well, molasses is eminently fermentable. You can take a gallon of molasses and 2 gallons of water and get a gallon of rum from it. So you have two items that are free, water and molasses, and you can make a product that will sell. So as a result, there is a very old trade in molasses that has gone all over the world. Australia, even though Australia is a fairly major rum-producing country, they still produce more sugar up in Queensland, so they export their molasses to New Zealand, where it is made into rum. There is a trade that goes back to the Caribbean era of taking molasses from British colonies in the Caribbean and sending it up to Newfoundland, where it is made into a particularly powerful and vile rum called Newfoundland Screech. Called Screech because of the fact that the average unwary person drinking it for the first time tends to scream. That is actually where it gets the name. So you have rum that is made not only in that way, also you have drinks that by any reasonable standard should be called rum, but there are legal problems because at least in the United States and the European Union, to be called rum, something has to be made from sugarcane. However, you can make a product that is indistinguishable from rum out of sorghum. And among the other places where people are making a sorghum-based rum is that famous rum-producing area, Wisconsin. So people are making sorghum-based rums there. There are rums that use combinations of molasses and sorghum that come out of Thailand and come out of various places in Southeast Asia, and a huge amount in China as well. Now, for cultural reasons, some of this is called whiskey, as in a beverage that a lot of people may be familiar with called Mekong whiskey, which is actually a rum. It's made out of 95% molasses, 5% rice. But it's called Mekong whiskey because whiskey is sort of the generic term for an alcoholic beverage. Any distilled beverage is referred to as whiskey in much of Asia. So there's a lot of things that people drink thinking that they're drinking whiskey, and they're actually drinking rum.
A question here. You wait for Mike.
I was late, so I apologize if this was already brought up. I'll take offline. But I was curious about, I mean, like some of the ingredients seem, must-dos. But for vodka, what's, from potato to grain, is there one that's more
You can make
preferred?
vodka out of anything fermentable, including molasses. You
But
make
is there
vodka
one like
out
the Russians or
Well,
Americans?
yes,
think
the
of?
Russians and Poles and other Slavic peoples insist that vodka be made of grain or potato. They will not accept the European wider acceptance of vodka made from grapes or apples or oranges. And I'm not talking about infusions or flavoring, but fermented products from fruit of that sort. It's not considered real vodka. And you cannot call anything Russian vodka unless it's made from grain. And that is considered the preferable kind of vodka. And potatoes came in the 19th century into that region, so then potatoes were also used.
A final question, perhaps? Anybody?
I may add, there's...
You can add
that,
anything
okay.
you want. Go ahead. Well, let's give an opportunity for each of our
All right.
speakers to say a final benediction. So, Lesley, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
We're just going to give a final comment, or why don't we start with Patricia and you can think. So, all right, Patricia, a final comment.
Well, we were speaking about ingredients, and now there is a product in a sachet which you can put into a pure vodka, I mean by that unflavored, and come up with a flavored drink such as gin or whiskey or Irish cream. They have taken the chemical properties of those drinks, and because of the nothingness of vodka, you can come up with a facsimile of it, so to speak. I have not tasted it. Also, you don't have to have the liquid with you if you want to have your vodka drink. There's a professor in St. Petersburg who's developed a powder. You can just have some powder and have your little drink in that form. So vodka has come to be so versatile that it's not even any longer necessarily a liquid, nor is it necessarily any longer vodka. It can become any of the other drinks.
Is the powder actually alcoholic, or is it just taste like? It
yes,
is.
It's better for baking, but
I'm sorry, I had to ask. Richard, final comments?
Well, just with all three beverages, you can see that the marketing and the ingenuity in the last half century has exploded. It has exploded with rum in a different way from the other two, because where with gin and vodka, the explosion is in flavorings, what has happened with rum is an explosion of creativity in terms of how to express the character of your raw material in ways in which it has never been done before. Molasses around the world changes flavor, and sugarcane juice around the world changes in flavor depending on the climate, the soil, the particular strain of sugarcane. And where with vodka and rum, the idea is to get as pure alcohol as possible and then do strange things with it. The idea with rum has been to tinker with it and to find flavors that had never been found before. So if the most sophisticated rum connoisseur of 20 to 30 years ago would not recognize most of any of these three, and none of the people who drink these beverages 30 years ago would recognize most of what's on the market because of an explosion of not merely marketing expertise of putting your bottle in a dress or wrapping it in a cask or something like that, but because of an incredible amount of human ingenuity and creativity. And for a lot of people, there are people out there who just think of alcohol as something, distilled alcohols as something of a commodity. Insofar as it ever was, it sure isn't anymore.
Lesley?
I think I would like to direct my last comment to the really the modern cocktail era. While gin is very much sort of the champion of the classic cocktail movement today, things like rum and whiskey and vodka tend to overshadow it in the general populace. I think because those flavors in some ways or lack of flavor, are perhaps safer or more comforting. I don't want to say less challenging because every spirit has its own challenges. But one thing about gin that I truly love and what makes it one of my favorite spirits is that there is a gin out there for everybody. So if you are not truly a gin drinker, you owe it to yourself to try and find something that will work with your palate. If you tend to like whiskey, certainly go with something like your neighbor because it has a malt-like sweetness that makes it much more akin to whiskey than any gin you will taste from Old Tom to London Dry to the modern artisan gins. And if you're not a fan of the juniper, that piney flavor that is so much a part of what London Dry gin is, try one of these newer gins like Hendrick's or like some of the others that are coming on the market that have more of the floral qualities. They are absolutely stunning on their own, served neat, and they are beautiful, beautiful evocations and cocktails. And there's definitely something out there that everybody's palate will appreciate. Much like beer or wine, there is always something that can light up your eyes and change your opinion. And gin is definitely a spirit that can do that.
Thank our panelists. Just some quick comments. Richard can stay here for a few minutes. Your next person has not picked you up. Richard will be giving a presentation at 8 o'clock at the National Arts Club on drinking with Jane Austen. It is free, and anybody who wishes to go over to the National Arts Club at 8 o'clock can do so. It's on 20th Street in Gramercy Park.
I should note
So,
no actual Jane Austen will be provided. This is what it's about is the beverages of the English Regency period and how Jane Austen and other authors would indicate who a character was by what they drank. So it is about the beverage and also about all of the things that were happening off stage in the rest of English society. So I'm trying to give an idea of what everyone was drinking, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic, during this period. And yes, anything I drink is tax deductible. I love this job.
thank you.